All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So this is my third run of the same course, the Tahawiyya Creed. It's Aqeeda level 1. The reason I've run it 3 times in a row is to leave no excuse for anyone for not attending this, and then that'll be your card, your entry card to this place. If you haven't attended Aqeeda, then I'm going to ask you to go pray in another masjid and leave me alone, and you can find something else to do. I think that it's mandatory for every Muslim to have attended at least one Aqeeda course within their lifetime, and preferably they attend something where they are being taught Aqeeda in a way that allows them to understand their creed in a sense, in a way that puts them in unity with the majority of the Muslim Ummah around them, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Unfortunately, what happens many times, or it happens more often than it should, that people learn Aqeedah, and that actually serves as the basis of their division with most Muslims around them. And it serves as reasons for them not to pray in this masjid, or not to pray in that masjid, or not to listen to this sheikh, or not to listen to that sheikh. And it turns into a reason for division. And I absolutely refuse that. And I think it's important that this is taught appropriately. So to preface this, the course will have maybe one assignment, I think maybe 2. There'll be a point where you have to answer the question whether you're a credit student or an audit student. You don't have to be a credit student. You can just listen. It's totally fine. I'm very happy with that. But if you do want to get the credit, and you want, as a part of the Imam Dimont Academy, you want to take courses, then you just have to answer that you're a credit student, do the assignments, and then there'll be some reading material, and there'll be some audio material that you have to watch. You just have to check that you watched it. If you didn't watch it and you checked it, then you lied, and you have bigger problems than my Aqeedah course, honestly, if you're doing that. But you just have to kind of declare that you've listened to it, and that's pretty much it. There'll be an exam at the end of the course. The course ends towards in the middle of August, end of August. It's usually 13 or 14 sessions that this whole course takes. It's not very long. It'll be an hour each. We'll start at 8. Whenever Maghrib comes, we pray Maghrib, and then we go back. It will make up for the time missed. Usually the lecture is around an hour. So today we're going to go for Maghrib. After Maghrib, we'll continue. We won't continue until Isha by any means. We'll go to maybe 9:15, 9:20, and then we'll stop, and people can go home or wait until Isha, inshallah, is timing. This is the what you're going to look for this on the website as the classroom to make sure, even if you're an audit student, even if you're not credit, you can still get into the classroom because you have access to the reading material and to the slides and to the link for the lessons and all that stuff, because I want you to be able to have access to all of these materials and resources. But you don't have to you still don't have to take the exam at the end. I say this because I don't look forward to correcting 50 exams, honestly, at the end of semester. So if you don't take it, I'm not getting offended. Not at all. I have no problem. What I care about is that you learn, inshallah, the material, and you end up comfortable with your own creed, with your own aqeedah, what you believe. You have less doubts, you have less problems. It serves as a reason for your unity with Muslims around you, and you understand maybe where some of the disagreements or the khilafat that exist in Ummah come from, and you have a good grasp on these reasons. So what are the course objectives? We'll aim to focus on the basics of Islamic theology. I'll only point out the major issues of difference of opinion. Only the major ones. I mean, and when I say major, they're not necessarily going to be major in terms of their weight within the creed. No, major in terms of the division that they cause in the ummah. So sometimes I'll talk about an issue of difference of opinion that, in my opinion, or the opinion of scholars, is not actually worth being pointed out in a first level Aqeedah course. But I'll point it out anyways, because it causes so much difference and so much differing and so much animosity within our ummah, so that you're aware of it, so that you're not later on directed or moved in a direction of knowledge, kind of unaware of these differences. It's a level 1 course. I'm not going to dive into the controversy between each school of thought. That'll be for a second level course. I'll happily do that. We'll talk a little bit more philosophically in a second level course, but this is a basic course. So I'm just going to touch on the fundamentals that every Muslim should know, regardless of whether they are students of knowledge and they want to take additional credits and courses, or they just want to know their deen. Then this is what you absolutely have to know. I'm going to take a little bit of a modern approach to help with some of the current anti-faith problems that exist within our ummah, meaning the way Aqeeda was taught 1,000 years from today. So we're in 2025. In 1025, Aqeeda was taught in a way that I think we can afford to differ a little bit on the method of teaching it. Not because anything has changed in the Aqeeda, but because to a certain degree, the challenges of the people who are listening have changed in terms of their Aqeeda. Back then, it was the ongoing debates between the Muslims and the Christians and the Persians and the Jews. And today, it's really not that anymore. We've actually went beyond that. Very, very, very few Muslims, if any, convert to another religion. Very few, almost like when we talk about statistics, and Yaqeen has a statistic on this. Statistically speaking, very, very few Muslims around the world convert to other faiths. When Muslims leave their faith, and we have a sizable amount of people who do annually. It's not a small number. It's a sizable number of people who actually leave Islam annually. They don't leave Islam to another faith. They leave it to what is called agnosticism or atheism. So the struggles that we have today with faith are different than they were 1,000 years ago. So, and hence the different approach. I may teach it in a different approach. I won't change any of the basic meanings at all. I'm just going to approach it a little bit differently to help you, inshallah, find it relevant and helpful. This course will have a mandatory virtual material. It'll be a part of the assessment and course marks. You have to listen to Facing Disbelief. I'll put the link. You have to listen to the seven episodes that I ran a couple of years ago. I ran that course in Ramadan specifically for this course. Like I did it with this course in mind. I actually ran this course immediately after it. But the reason being is that if I were going to take the material of that course and put it in this would go from a 14 session course to a 24 session course, and it would be too long, and it would not be something you could afford to attend anymore. But you have to listen to it on your own time. It's 7 hours. You have to find time, inshallah, to listen to it over the next few months. Inshallah, you'll find it worth your time. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. We'll connect the articles of faith to practices and behaviors, as this discipline was always meant to do and to be. Meaning, Aqeeda is often seen as a very dry topic within Islam, something that's boring or something that's just very philosophical. Look, Aqeeda has always been the launching point of behaviors and ethics and change. It always has been, and it is today. I'm going to emphasize to the best of my ability how your belief system is what actually motivates you and moves you to be the better person. So when you learn Aqeeda aspects of Aqeeda, the articles of faith, these articles of faith are directly connected to your choices and your decision-making process and the behaviors and ethics and values that you carry in your life. They're not in any way, they're not disconnected. The disconnection is actually the problem. The problem in our ummah today is that we can afford to talk about God in a certain way, but then our behaviors don't reflect that we actually believe it. And that's a big problem for you to be able to articulate the attributes of the Almighty to a certain degree, you're doing a good job at it, but then your behaviors, your choices in life don't seem to be reflecting the fact that you believe the Almighty to be whom you claim to believe him to be. So it has to be connected. You have to, and that's what Aqeeda has always been. That's why the old books of Aqeeda, as we're going to actually experience here within this course, we're never purely theological. Today you can buy a book of theology, and it's just talking about the philosophy, about the belief articles, what your perspectives are. Islamic books of Aqeeda, the earlier you go back, the more you find this, were a mix of Aqeeda and Suluk and Tazkiyah and Fiqh and Jihad. They talk about everything. It started from the basic points, but it always moved into every aspect of life, because that's how the scholars understood this. That if you're going to build here are the building bricks of your faith that should lead into 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, which is confusing to the modern human being who likes their books to be very well categorized. I don't want fiqh and suluk and tazkiyah in a book of theology. I just want the theology. No, you don't. You actually want them to be in the same place, because there's a missing, you end up with a missing link. You start actually thinking that you can afford to believe all of this and then not actually have the practice immediately adjacent to it. So we're going to try and challenge that a little bit, inshallah, in this course. So let's start by talking about Imam al-Tahawi, Abu Ja'far Ahmad al-Tahawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So he died, rahmatullah alayhi, in the year of 321 Hijri, 1,100 years ago. He wrote his text, obviously, not the day that he died, so it was at least 50 years prior to him dying. So this text that we're going to read is 1,150 years old. All right, I want you to think about that. Aside from the Quran, you'll never actually run into something that is relevant. Outside of Islam, you won't run into stuff like this, where you can take a text that was written a millennium ago and study it as is, with no changes needed, and benefit the way the people who studied it 1,000 years ago benefited from it. And I'm not going to change anything in the text. I'm just going to maybe approach it a little bit differently so that you find it a little bit more relevant. This is the authenticity of your deen. This is the beauty of it. You don't actually require to write another book. And no, this Aqeeda, this book that was written by Imam al-Tahawi, he's a Hanafi scholar of fiqh and hadith, and he wrote this book as what we're using it for, as a basic book of creed, just running through the basics, no interest in getting to any details at all. And it became the most famous book of Aqeeda of all time within Islamic law. All of the groups, all Islamic groups of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah agree on what exists, on what's written, what's said within this book. They don't differ on the fundamentals that he talked about, rahimahullah, at all. They differ on a few details at the end of the book, and I'll point them out to you once we come to them, and they're really tertiary points that don't require much time to be spent. I put a little bit of a biography up here for you if you want to read a little bit more about him. But he's a figure that is highly respected amongst all groups because he lived in the early centuries of Islamic law. The first 300 years are seen differently. I mean, the scholars who come from those times are viewed differently and they're learned from differently. And this text is over 1,100 years old. So, ilm al-i'tiqad has a number of different names. The reason I'm sharing these names with you is because if you end up being interested in this discipline and you decide you want to read a little bit more, you'll find that there are different names that the scholars gave ilm al-aqeeda. So ilm al-aqeeda, the word aqeeda is probably the earliest or the most famous of phrases. And the word aqada is when a knot is made. Uqda is a knot. So ilm al-aqeeda, it's like you're making knots where something is stable. It's not movable anymore, and it fixates something. So this is not debatable. This is not something that can later on be displaced. It's like you're making a knot. This is it. This is what I accept. So and from that the word came. But another name for it is ilm al-tawheed. Is the science of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it is always known to be the most important part of our understanding of the Almighty, of God Himself. Ilm al-Iman, and this is an older calling. So Imam al-Shafi'i in his book al would use ilm al-Iman to talk about this. He wouldn't use the word aqeeda because it just wasn't the word that was used. The nomenclature at that time was different, so he used the word al-Iman. Ilm al-Fiqh al-Akbar is what Abu Hanifa called it within his teachings. That's why if you read older Hanafi fiqh texts and usul fiqh texts, then you'll find that when they refer to ilm al-aqeeda, they refer to it by using the term ilm al-fiqh al-akbar. The great ilm so fiqh is basically a specialized knowledge. That's what fiqh is. Ilm is knowledge in general, and fiqh is specialized knowledge. It was used from a terminology perspective in Islam. It was used later on to talk about the practices, the do's, the don'ts, the halal, the haram, the wajib, the makruh, all that stuff. So al-fiqh al-akbar is the best or the superior specialized knowledge, meaning out of all the books of knowledge, all of the disciplines, this is the most important. That's why one of the things that you're taught by ulama, and this is what I was taught early on, that if you have books at home, there's a certain sequence of how you have to put them. If you have a bookshelf and there's like level up and level down, level. So if an imam walks into the house and he happens to look at your bookshelf and you don't have it right, he'll leave. He'll just declare that you don't know what you're doing. If you have ilm al-tafsir and ilm al-aqeeda in the lower shelf and whatever on the top shelf, he'll leave the house. Like he'll say, this person is not worthy of, you don't even know the basics. You don't even know that you put ilm al-tafsir with tawheed at the top. And then after that, you put ilm al-hadith and ilm al-sirah. And then after that, you put ilm al-fiqh. There's a certain sequence because every discipline is important, but there are priorities. And ilm al-tawheed or ilm al-iman or ilm al-aqeeda or ilm al-fiqh al-akbar, this is seen as the highest of all of the disciplines of knowledge, along with the tafsir of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning the explanation, exegesis of the Quran. Ilm usul al-din, the knowledge of the origins of the faith. It's another term, and this is what the Malikis used, especially in Andalus. And ilm al-kalam is what was used in Sham and in Misr and in parts of Mesopotamia for a very long time, especially during the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth century in concession. And you wonder why. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit throughout the course. But the main reason is because the Islam expanded very, very quickly in a lot of different directions. This was very helpful and beautiful on a lot of levels. But what it also did, the challenge that it brought, is that people entered Islam and they brought their luggage with them. They brought their intellectual baggage with them from their faiths. And you had a lot of people who came from different faiths who didn't accept Islam, but now they were living within the Muslim Ummah. And they had a lot, they wanted to poke holes at the theology of what Islam was bringing, because Islam's theology, what I'm going to teach you, is very pure. It's very simple. It's actually not complicated at all. You don't have to jump through philosophical or mental hoops to accept what's being explained to you. And actually, you're following that which makes the most sense at all times. Like at all times, you're always following that which is most simple, the most simple explanation for everything. So the scholars of other faiths would constantly want to poke holes at whatever it is that Muslims were teaching. So you ended up having the Muslim scholars in those areas forced to be in constant debates. In order to protect the Muslims of these towns and these cities, they had to put up debates. These debates went on for centuries. They would happen in the large gatherings, like in masajid, and it would go on for a long time. And it made the knowledge of tawheed and iman and fiqh akbar, it was called ilm al-kalam afterwards, meaning kalam, the ability to articulate. It's not the ability to speak, it's just a gab. No, it's the knowledge of articulation. Because what they found is that in order for you to be able to convince the other party or to keep the narrative going, you have to be able to articulate the words properly. Or else, if you don't articulate it well, then you leave a couple of holes in the wording that you chose, and then you open the door for more debates to go on, and then the debate never ends. So ilm al-kalam, if kalam is articulation. So if you know how to articulate, you can explain the concept, because actually, the name itself is very descriptive of the challenge. The problem wasn't the belief system. The belief system in Islam is very clear and simple. The challenge was the kalam. The challenge was, were you able to articulate it in a way that that delivered the idea to the person who was listening? If you failed to deliver it appropriately, then you opened the door for more debates, and it kept on going. So it became whoever al-mutakallim is the person who knew how to articulate. Explain tawheed in the most simplest of ways, presenting it in the purest of its forms. So these are the different names of the discipline of theology: Aqeeda, Tawheed, Iman, Fiqh Akbar, Usul al-Din, Ilm Kalam. If you ever decide to read older texts that talk about this discipline, you'll find all these terms were used to describe it. So there are three schools of creed within our deen. There are three schools of creed in our deen. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah have three schools of creed, similarly to how they have four schools of jurisprudence. Just like you have the Hanafi and the Maliki and the Shafi'i and the Hanbali, you have three schools of creed as well. You have the Ash'ari school, you have the Maturidi school, and then you have the late Hanbali school, or what is called the Athari school, or the Salafi school. They're all names for the same school of thought. Scholars of our Ummah, of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, come from all three schools of creed. Meaning, if you were to take a sample of maybe 100 scholars of Islamic law going back into our history, and you just take a snapshot, choose a place and choose a specific time, and then take 100 scholars of Islamic law, you will find that they are dispersed amongst these three schools, pretty much evenly, with even discrepancy amongst these scholars in terms of how they follow these schools. So unlike fiqh, where the expectation is that if you take a madhab, you follow the detail, you just follow the madhab in terms of, and you worship Allah through the understanding of 100,000 scholars who made choices in terms of what they thought the evidence meant when it came to your acts of worship. When it comes to ilm al-aqeeda, you don't actually have to do that. And the scholars didn't do that in the past, and you're not required to do that today. Meaning you can listen to the arguments of any of these three schools, and something may make more sense to you, so you accept that, and you don't have to stick to one of them versus the other. That was never the expectation, because it's different. Fiqh, the way fiqh is built, the way that jurisprudence is built, is that you have to have an algorithm of knowledge of evidence extraction. I mean, you have to know how you're going to extract your evidence, how you're going to weigh that evidence, and how you're going to interpret that evidence. So scholars do that. Laymen, we're not supposed to do it. Scholars know how to do it. So if you want to be safe, then you choose an imam who has an algorithm, has a system of weighing evidence, extracting rulings from evidence, and then you follow whatever their teachings are. For Aqeedah, it's different. It's not the same. It doesn't follow. Because when it comes to evidence, the evidence for Aqeedah is not the same as the evidence for fiqh. Evidence for fiqh can be all across the board. It can be words the Sahaba said or things Ahl Medina did. For Aqeedah, it's not the case. You're going by the Quran and by that which was known from the Prophet ﷺ with very little doubt that he did or didn't do it, because of the fact it's such a heavy and important discipline. For Aqeedah, the evidence that is required is much more strict. The rules are much more strict. So you have less evidence. So you can afford to actually make choices between these schools of creed. Each of these schools are valid, all three of them. The scholars who differed on certain aspects of creed within them, they differed within the boundaries of what was accepted from them to differ upon. And they only differed on aspects of creed that the holy text was not decisive about. There's this phrase that Imam al-Bahbahari al-Hanbali says in his book, قال اجتهدوا رحمهم الله فيما لم يحسمه النص وفيما ساغ فيه الاجتهاد لأمثالهم من الأكابر. Meaning that what they performed ijtihad upon, meaning where would they differed, where Imam Ash'ari and Imam Ahmad and Imam Maturidi differed upon within Aqeedah, were on topics that the text was not decisive about, meaning the text could be interpreted in different directions, and they differed on things that they are obligated to differ upon. This is their realm. This is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to differ on things where there's lack of decisiveness, and there are different ways to understand. They didn't differ on things that have, on pieces of evidence that have no two way to interpret. That didn't happen. The reason that we are Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and there are other sects, the reason, for example, there are Ahmadis and there are Qadianis, is because they made decisions within Aqeedah that went against the decisiveness of the text. And once you go against the decisiveness of the text, khalas, you leave the parameters of what Islam is, because there are certain things that exist within the Quran, certain things the Prophet ﷺ was extremely clear about throughout his life. There's really no way two ways to understand it. And once you decide that you're going to add to Aqeedah something, you're going to add something to our belief system that doesn't exist within Islam altogether. And you decide that wahi didn't end with Muhammad ﷺ. When you make that decision that Jibreel didn't stop coming, he didn't end revelation with the Prophet ﷺ, he's going to continue. You've now made a declaration. This is a fundamental difference, because wahi for us ended with the Quran. There's no more wahi. Jibreel does not bring revelation from God anymore, right? This is an issue of Aqeedah. If you decide that no, he'll continue to do it, that is something, okay, then we are now fundamentally differing on something very basic. You'll have two different sects now, and they'll call themselves different names. So within the realm of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, these three schools only differ on aspects of creed where differing of scholars is acceptable. It's even obligatory. I mean, scholars have to differ. He's a scholar. He is required to think about this, to study, and then to give his opinion on the matter. That's what they're supposed to do. Islam was designed to have this within it from the get-go. Islam has always been like that. This is how the divine design is for this deen. There are fundamentals that are easy. The Ash'ari, the Maturidi, and the Hanabila Mutaakhirin will all agree upon. There's actually no difference of opinion whatsoever. And there are details where the human mind finds some room for whatever suits its way of understanding things. Because if you think about it, look at how many people are in the room. It's very difficult to get people to agree on things, on anything. Yet, at the end of this course, you will find that 99% of our creed is fully agreed upon. We don't argue. We argue over very small details. My intention for you is to know what those details are, become comfortable with the fact that they are legitimately points for disagreement, meaning it's fine. You can understand it this way, and I can understand it that way, and that's not going to ruin the unity of our ummah, nor will it ruin the ability for us to pray with one another, or behind one another, or collaborate with one another. And it should not be grounds for division by any stretch of the imagination. And the example I'm going to give you here are these two books. So the Aqeedah al-Tahawiyya, written by Imam Tahawi, was explained in the same timing So these are amongst the early books that the scholars explain Aqeeda Tahawi. They've been doing it for 1,000 years, but they didn't actually write books on shuruhat until later, until maybe a couple of centuries later, when printing became easier. So for sure, there were books that were written in the explanation of the Tahawi creed that didn't reach us because it's just the print. It happened too early. Very few books reached us from the 3rd century. Al-Tahawiyya is one of them. Muwatta Imam Malik is another one. Yeah, Sahih Bukhari is the third. Like there are very few books, and they're few or far apart, and they're very important. Like Kitab al-Umm, Imam al-Shafi'i. These books, were only made it to us because they were so famous. They were so famous that imagine if you have one book per 100,000 authors, right? If only one of them is going to get a book, then you're only going to get the most important. The rest of them are going to fall off. So it was only until maybe the 7th or 8th Hijri century that print became easier and paper was able to come by. So we ended up with a number of shuruhat for the Aqeeda Tahawiyya. And the interesting piece is that within the same 3 years of each other. So Imam al-Ghaznawi al-Hindi, Abi Hafs Siraj al-Din Umar ibn Ishaq al-Ghaznawi al-Hindi, he died in the 737 Hijri. Imam al-Qadi Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Abi al-Izz al-Hanafi al-Dimashqi, who came from Damascus specifically, died in the year 778, so 5 years later. And they each wrote a book on the Sharh of Aqeeda Tahawiyya. On the right, he was an Athari scholar, so he wrote his Sharh in an Athari way. And on the left, Imam al-Ghaznawi al-Hindi is an Ash'ari, and he wrote it in an Ash'ari way. So the same time, within our Islamic history, the same book was explained by 2 scholars who lived 5 years from one another in terms of time. They lived in the same age, and they wrote 2 books explaining it from their perspectives that were not exactly the same. And at that time, there was no problem. There was no problem. Among scholars, there are no problems on these difference of opinions, by the way. Scholars don't differ on these things. It's their students that do. It's the people who study one text and decide now that they know everything. And they're going to go after a scholar who spent maybe 50 years of their life studying, and they're going to call him names. It's the suit of, because some of the scholars, what they forget to do when they teach these things is they forget to teach adab with their students. That one of the first things you have to learn is the adab of learning knowledge. Meaning you learned something today, you walked away, you have an aqeedah, you understand something. That doesn't mean that gives you you don't have a green light to go after every single person who believes within Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah things are a bit different than you, specifically scholars of high caliber within Islamic history. And yet we see this all the time. And that's how people get famous on YouTube, by the way. Honestly, if you want to make money for the masjid, all I have to do is just do this. You can turn it on live. I just make one comment, just one outrageous comment on one of the scholars and suddenly everyone will listen. And moderation, no one's interested in it, but if someone's going to say something insane, and this is unfortunately the problem that we continue to have. We have individuals who get the ears of our shababs, unfortunately, specifically, where they go after a scholar of older times, and they'll point out that there was a problem with his aqeedah. You're actually fathoming, arguing the Aqeedah Imam al-Nawawi. Wallahi, you feel I'm not worthy of being the dirt under his feet. You feel that you have the ability to point out that there's a mistake in his understanding of Islam. Why? Because you were taught the Aqeedah in one way. I'm not here to say that one way of Aqeedah is wrong. No, I'm here to say that all these ways of understanding are actually quite reasonable. And I'm going to explain that to you by the logic of what they did so that you can understand, so they can comprehend that in the tertiary aspects of i'tiqad, as the tertiary aspects of fiqh, there are more than one way to understand things. And it's fine. It's fine. It's how Islam was always designed to be. So calm down. And sometimes people who have the understanding it has to be all perfect. No. This is actually a mental health issue where everything has to be exactly the way. There can't be 2 rights. There has to be one right and everything else to be wrong. That's not, no. This is a mental disorder. Islamically, no. You have the fundamentals that we all agree upon, which is what we're going to focus on. Make sure that you walk out of here, you understand them fully and clearly, and we emphasize them to the extent that they need to be emphasized. But then there's another level where there's more than one way to look at this. There's more than one way to understand it. And Aqeedah, similarly to any other discipline of knowledge, will have tertiary aspects of it, 2nd level or 3rd level aspects of Aqeedah, where scholars have differed. And when you listen to their arguments, it'll make sense. And it's actually quite impressive because you'll see that people who lived 1,000 years ago they had a certain degree of awareness and maturity, intellectual maturity that we don't even have. Like they think about the universe and existence in ways that even today, with all of our science and our technology and our knowledge, we sometimes lack the ability to understand. And I'll make all of that. So let's start by the categorizations of the Athari school. All right. So the categorizations of the Athari school go into three: توحيد الربوبية, وتوحيد الألوهية, وتوحيد الأسماء والصفات. So they look at Tawheed from three different angles. They talk about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does for you or does to you, which they call that rububiyyah, his lordship. And then they talk about the Tawheed that goes from you to him, meaning what you owe him, and they call that uluhiyyah, meaning as your worship. And then they talk about Tawheed that is regarding his asma, his names, and sifat, his attributes, meaning understanding the descriptions of God. So understanding what God does to you or for you, understanding what you are owing God, and then understanding the attributes of God and the names. So those are the three ways that they look at it, which is a very reasonable way of doing it. And honestly, yeah, and it doesn't matter how you study it, you'll end up at the same conclusions. But I'm going to just point this out, and we're going to focus a little bit more on the other categorization, because it just it allows me a little bit more flexibility in talking about topics. So Tawheed al-Rububiyyah is singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the exalted, and providing sustenance, giving life, causing death, all the types of regulation. Okay, so we'll go for an administration of the dominion and the heavens and the earth, and also singling him out subhanahu wa ta'ala as being the only one who does those things. So recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does all of these things, and recognizing that he's the only one who does all of these things. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's rububiyyah. Uluhiyyah is singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with worship, meaning no one else is worthy of you giving up your free will, of you submitting yourself to, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Tawheed al-Asma' wa Sifat is focusing on understanding the descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, however he described himself, and whatever names he used to call himself subhanahu wa ta'ala in the authentic narrations. And to affirm that, and then this last piece is important, is I put a line here because what I want you to think about as we go for Salat al-Maghrib, and to affirm that for Allah without resemblance to creation or likening to creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not similar to his creation. There's no likeness to his creation. And without false interpretation of any of that or negation of any of that. So they put this phrase, it's an important phrase that the school, Athari school, has within it. It is the basis for a lot of the difference of opinion that exists between it and other schools, but I will explain it for you and flesh it out so that it makes sense to you. But it comes down to the same idea that there's no one like him, subhanahu. So we'll end with that. Just we'll pray Maghrib. We'll come after Salat al-Maghrib. We'll go maybe for another 30 minutes or less after Salat al-Maghrib and let you go, inshallah. Just put it over here.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله. استووا واعتدلوا واستقيموا ولا تختلفوا، حاذوا بين ولكن سدوا الخلل لا تدع فرجا بينكم، سووا الصف، تسيدوا الصف من إقام الصلاة، أتموا الأول فالأول ليوا بين إخوانكم، shoulder ankle to ankle to toes, front part of the dark right line, closing the gaps, straight line, silence your phones, still يرحمكم الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
We'll continue the dose right after Sunnah. The adult Quran program will happen in the extension, inshallah. And the Aqeeda course will continue, inshallah, in the main hall after Sunnah.
Thank you. حبيبي كيف الحال؟ شو اخبارك؟ طمنينا عنك. كيف الصحة؟ طمنينا عن اخبارك. الحمد لله بخير. انت في المدينة لسه موجود؟ لسه موجود. ان شاء الله انا بقول بس اشوف لك من هي. طيب اهلا وسهلا فيك مرحبا وين فيك مالك انت وين مالك؟ صار ما شفت هو رجال صار شبيهك ما شاء الله. ربي يحفظك ويحفظه ان شاء الله. اهلا وسهلا فيك وفيك. All right. We won't run until Isha, obviously. That's ridiculous, but I'll just go. The goal is the lecture is around an hour or so I can get through most of the my material, inshallah ta'ala. So just ask the brothers and sisters to take a seat. If you're going to go to the Quran program up front, feel free to do so. If you want to socialize, I think the lobby will be available for you to do that. Otherwise, if someone is asking me why we pray a sunnah before Maghrib, it came up a couple of times. So the Hanbalis and the Shafi'is, they see a sunnah, not ratiba, but they see a sunnah before Maghrib. It's not a daily, it's not an every time sunnah. So they have different levels of sunnah prayers. Some of them done every day, every time. Some of them done periodically. So the Shafi'is and the Hanabil and the Shafi'iyya see 2 rak'ahs before Maghrib. The Malikis and the Hanafis, they don't. They don't see 2 rak'ahs before Maghrib, and they don't see any prayer to be praying after Salat al-Asr except Maghrib. So even Tahiyat al-Masjid, they don't accept it. Like if you walk into the Masjid, a Hanafi brother wouldn't pray Tahiyat al-Masjid after Asr or a Maliki or after Fajr. And this is just based on difference of how they interpreted the evidence of what the Prophet ﷺ said and what some of the Sahaba did in their lives. And this is an example of fiqh difference. What we're going to be talking about in this course is a little bit more complicated. All right, so I want to just point out this sentence because it's important, and it's the basis for a certain amount of the difference of opinions that have existed between these schools of creed. Is when they talked about al-asma' wal-sifat, what they said was that when you affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is without resemblance, when you affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like his creation, he is not going to be likened or made resemble or drawn a resemblance to his creation. That is done without a false interpretation, without an improper ta'wil of any of his attributes, nor negating any of his attributes, without ta'til, without negation. And it's because of this phrase, the differences kind of came because certain scholars understood this phrase in a certain way and then refused certain understandings that others did. And I'll point all that out for you, inshallah, as we move along. But these are the 3 domains of Tawheed that the Athari school use to talk about Aqeeda. They talk about Aqeeda through these 3 domains. The Ash'ari Maturidi school, they use a different schema to actually go through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. I'm going to use it only because it's easier. It gives you a bit more space to talk about things. And there's no difference of opinion, even with the Athari school, regarding the basics. Like they don't disagree with these words that are up there. They have no problem with the actual descriptions. Their difference of opinion are on certain interpretations, and I'm going to point them out for you. So I'm not going to negate any of them. So the way that they look at it is that there are different breakdowns of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's descriptions. The existential attribute or sifa nafsiyya, they call it al-wujud, existence, meaning the first and foremost, when you speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first attribute is that Allah is there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mawjud, he exists. Obviously, you can't really talk about anything else if that piece is not established and and unfortunately, today, the majority of our discussions, or at least for the first couple of sessions, are going to be on that one, because this is where a lot of the confusion for people today. This was not something people were confused about or differed about 1,000 years ago. So they didn't spend much time talking about the sifa nafsiyya. They didn't talk about wujud much. They just went on and talked about the sifat al-salbiyya and ma'ani and whatnot. But we have to spend more time there. And this is just based on the needs of modern day theology and where the doubts actually occur and where the anti-arguments for faith originate from. الصفات السلبية, the attributes of denial, which are the five famous ones, الوحدانية, القدم, البقاء, مخالفته للحوادث, وقيامه بالنفس, which is the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pre-eternality, everlasting, the unlikeness of Him to His creation, and His self-subsistence subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in a moment, I'll kind of break down. So these five, in addition to the three categories that the Athari school has, which is Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, and Sifat, are put together in Surah Al-Ikhlas. So Surah Al-Ikhlas breaks all these down. So قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ Allahu Samad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, Al-Samad, He is a self-subsistence. Lam Yalid, He is the everlasting, nothing comes after Him. Lam Yulad, nothing comes before Him, He is the pre-eternal subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, nothing is similar to Him. قُلْ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. This is referring to His uluhiyyah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahu Samad. This is referring to His rububiyyah. And then lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. These are all His attributes, your tawheed, al-asma' wa sifat. So however you break down the surah, you end up with so the scholars of both schools, when they wanted to actually categorize tawheed or to categorize or come up with categories for ilm al-aqeeda, they used Surah Al-Ikhlas as the basis for it, and just came to different conclusions of how they wanted to run it. And then there's the personal attributes, the action-related attributes, and the exclusive attributes. We're going to go through all of them through time. So I don't need to memorize them now. But to start with the first one, piece, or the most important piece, which is Tawheed itself. As one of the names, or the main names of this discipline, which is Aqeeda, Ilm al-Tawheed. And the first of the five sifat of denial, meaning other creations are denied these attributes. There are five attributes that are only for God. Not even metaphorically can someone else have them. Allah al-Kareem, but metaphorically you can be Kareem. Not like Him, but metaphorically you can. But there are five that not even metaphorically are you allowed, which are the ones that we pointed out here. Al-Wahdaniyah, which is the first one, which is His oneness, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to spend today, tomorrow, next week, and the week after, kind of talking about Tawheed, Wahdaniyah, because it's probably the most important of them all. And within that, I will make the arguments on Al-Wujud, existence. So I'm going to put them together just to make this a little bit easier to follow. So you cannot claim oneness, not even metaphorically. You cannot claim pre-eternality, not even metaphorically. You can't claim everlastingness, not even metaphorically. You can't claim that you are unlike creation, or that you are beyond, that you are not finite, or you cannot argue that you're divine in any way, not even metaphorically. And you cannot argue that you self-sustain, or able to subsist yourself, right? Not even metaphorically. So these five are exclusively for Allah. So another name is not the attributes of denial, or the exclusive attributes. That's another way to categorize them, which is absolutely fine. It's just a tarjama. They're called sifat al-salb because they are something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has only for Himself, and it's a way that we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will differ from other faiths for sure. So let's start with the concept of Tawheed. Why is it so important? Why is it that if I asked anyone, any scholar, any Muslim on the street, to define Islam with one word, the majority of them would use the word Tawheed. Some of them, if I ask you, break down Islam for me in one word, don't translate the word. Don't just tell me it's submission. Don't translate the word. What would be the main concept of our deen? Then majority of scholars, the majority of laymen would use the word Tawheed, because this is what stands out in our faith. The pure monotheism that we have in Islam is what stands out for sure. But the question that has to be asked before we go into this course of Aqeeda, where I explain to you the theology and I break down this issue for you philosophically, is why is it so important? Where does it gain its significance? Because it would be very abnormal, it would be very weird that there's a belief that is extremely important, that's the most important belief, however, it has no effect on people at all. This would be a problem. It'd be problematic if there's a belief system where one of the articles of belief is the most fundamental one, yet whether you had it or not would make no difference on your life. That would be very, very abnormal. It would be actually weird. It would actually defeat the purpose of this faith, and it would be an argument point against the faith itself. If a faith decided that one of its articles of belief, one of its theological points, was the most important, yet that point, whether a person believed in it or didn't, made no difference to how they lived their lives, that would be a big problem. That would be a huge problem. This fundamental belief article has to have a substantial effect on how the human being is going to function. So the question that I ask you So the question that I ask always is, why is Tawheed so important? And I've asked this question and I surveyed people on it. And the majority of the answers were absolutely wrong. There was no coherence in the answers that were offered. People want to say something nice about Tawheed, so they make things up as they go along because they really don't understand why it's that important. Yes, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. I understand. Of course He said so, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's more than enough. But why is it important to you? Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes this point so much? What is it doing for you differently? If there's any degree of doubt or lack of clarity on this answer, then we have a real problem. Because what I'm here to teach you over the next 14 weeks is Tawheed, is the science of Tawheed, is the knowledge of Tawheed. So you can walk away a pure monotheist. But if you walk away a pure monotheist and it affects you in no way at all, doesn't that become a bit problematic? If it has no effect on your behavior, does not affect how you live your life whatsoever, then what's the point in believing it? If you and someone who has no acceptance of this belief are exactly the same, it's a problem. So I'll give you examples of what the Prophet ﷺ would say. Man kana akhiru kalamihi min ad-dunya la ilaha illa Allah dakhala al-jannah. If you are granted the opportunity or the gift of saying these words at the end, then you'll enter Jannah. He says alayhi salatu wasalam, lan yuwafiya abdun yawm al-qiyamah yaqulu la ilaha illa Allah yabtaghi bihi wajha Allah illa harram Allahu alayhi an-nar. That a person will come yawm al-qiyamah if he said in his life, La ilaha illallah, and in his heart he wanted only to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will save him from the punishment of the hellfire. Umar ibn Khattab says that the Prophet ﷺ tells us, the hadith is in Sunan al-Nasa'i rahmatullah alayhi, قال إني لأعلم كلمة لا يقولها عبد حقا من قلبه فيموت على ذلك إلا حرم على النار لا إله إلا الله. Indeed, I know a phrase that if a servant says it comes from his heart, and he believed it fully, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will save him from the punishment of the fire. When the Imam Bukhari narrates in his Sahih that when Abu Talib came to die, the Prophet ﷺ came and said the following, he told him, قُلْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ كَلِمَةٌ أُحَاجُّ لَكَ بِهَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Just say La ilaha illallah and I will fight for you. I will fight for you in front of Allah. So I won't move until you're taken care of. Just give me that word. Just give me this one testimony. Just say La ilaha illallah and I will not move from where I am until you are safe. He would say alayhi salatu wasalam في رواية أبي يعلى أكثروا من شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله قبل أن يحال بينكم وبينها ولقنوها موتاكم. Meaning, increase the amount of times you say La ilaha illallah during a day, before a moment comes where you want to say it, but your tongue won't allow you to say it. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. At the end of your life, your tongue will only be allowed to say that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits it to say. You're not in control anymore. So La ilaha illallah at the moment of death is not a choice, it's a conclusion, it's a consequence. It's a natural result of choices you made in your life. You're going to be granted to say this word now. وَلَقِّنُوهَا مَوْتَاكُم. When you sit with someone who you know is passing away, keep on teaching them La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. One of the scholars, min al-Bayt, Imam al-Haddad rahimahullah, when he was passing away, one of his grandchildren came and sat beside him. And he would sit there and do what the sunnah is. He would say, the Shahad Tawheed, La ilaha illallah. Because he was sitting there and he wasn't saying anything that was audible. So he sat there a few times and he said, La ilaha illallah. And the grandfather, who was on his deathbed, his eyes are closed, and he would open his eyes every time the grandson would say it. After the fourth time, he perked himself up again, and he said, "Anta qul la ilaha illallah." You say La ilaha illallah. هل تظن أن هذه الساعة حضرتني إلا وقد مزجت لا إله إلا الله بدمي قل أنت لا إله إلا الله ودعني فأنا في ورد السابع. He told him, you say La ilaha illallah. You think I allowed this moment to come to me without La ilaha illallah being a part of my DNA? You say La ilaha illallah. I'm in my seventh word. You're interrupting me. I'm trying to do tasbih and you're interrupting me. Go say La ilaha illallah on your own. Let me do my thing. Worry about yourself. Rahmatullah alayhi. Ibn Hibban narrates in his Sahih. The hadith is Hasan, but it's called the Sahih Ibn Hibban. The Prophet ﷺ said, قال موسى يا ربي علمني شيئا أذكرك وأدعوك به. Teach me something to speak of you and invocate you and remember you through. قال قل يا موسى لا إله إلا الله. So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to say لا إله إلا الله. قال كل عبادك يقولون هذا. He said, all of your servants say it. I'm asking you for something special. Give me something special to say. فقال سبحانه وتعالى يا موسى لو أن السماوات السبع وعامرهن غيري والأراضين السبع وعامرهن غيري في كفة ولا إله إلا الله في كفة لمالت بهن لا إله إلا الله. And if you put all of the cosmos, with everyone who lives in it, and all of the earth and everything that ever lived on it, you put in one hand of the scale, one part of the scale, and you put in another scale, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah is heavier than all of it. So just say La ilaha illallah. Why? Because it's the most important. It is the declaration of Tawheed. It is the purest form of declaring monotheism, of belief in the oneness of Allah. So there's no phrase in any language that is more concise, that is more precise, and is more accurate than the concept of La ilaha illallah. It's in the Quran twice, the same ayah. It's the same surah, Surah An-Nisa. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi wa yaghfiru ma duna dhalika liman yasha. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive people to associate others with him, to claim that there are gods or godly-like creations or creations that have God-like powers. He doesn't forgive them. He forgives everything else. This is actually a very optimistic ayah, because he'll say everything else will find a way around. This one we won't, so don't come to me with this. Don't come to me with making one of these mistakes. So I'm trying to convince you, I'm trying to argue for you how much this has been emphasized in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the concept of La ilaha illallah, and that this is probably the only thing that's not forgiven. So why is it of such importance? Its importance comes from the red line concept. This is something that I explain in different lectures. I want you to understand. The source of importance of La ilaha illallah comes from this idea of the red line concept that I want to explain to you. Imagine that when you're living life, there are red lines in your life that you're not supposed to cross. If you cross them, then you get in trouble. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself, who is drawing these lines? And are they qualified to draw these lines for me? And what knowledge do they have that allows them or puts them in a position where they can dictate to me what I can and cannot do? Now, the reason that we follow the red lines of the law is because you go to jail if you don't. That's really all it is. If you didn't go to jail, most of us wouldn't follow these laws. That's why street lights in the Middle East are just suggestions. They don't serve as the law. They just says, maybe I should slow down, but I don't feel like it today, because there's no one. They're not really law. So the only reason that we follow the law is because there are consequences to not following the law. But outside of the law, let's kind of put the law aside. Let's talk about behaviors and choices that we have in our lives. What dictates what we can and cannot do? So the basic argument that I make here, which is very simple, is you have a constant source of laws, or a constant source of teachings, or a constant source of values, because for us, red lines are values, right? This is the line. Over there is zina, over here is halal. There's the line. Over there is shirk, over here is tawheed. There's the line. Over there is lying, over here is honesty. There's the line. Over there is betrayal, over here is trustworthiness. It's the line. If the ones who are making these values or drawing the lines, if they're finite, or if they are ignorant, or if they are equal to you, then you are capable of arguing back. Meaning, if when a guy draws these lines for me, and I look at him, well, you're a bit more knowledgeable than me, but after a while, I'll get a few PhDs, and they'll be equal. So I'm going to argue back. I don't like these lines that you drew. And because they're not divine, and because they are finite like me, and because they are subject to the same amount of ignorance that I could have, I can argue back and forth to these lines, which is why these lines over time, what ends up happening is they get pushed. They get pushed far away. That's why if you take a snapshot or a picture of 1925 and 2025 of a community, they don't look like the same. Very different. Why? Because these lines were pushed because those who drew them were human. And when a human draws them, even if it's a bunch of humans, a bunch of people, well, if people drew it, then people can undraw it. Right? The concept of red lines in Tawheed is that if you have a constant source of values, that will lead to constant values, that will lead to constant ethics and behaviors. If you have variable or multiple sources of values, then you'll end up with variable values, and you'll end up with variable behaviors and ethics. This is why Tawheed is so important. It's this simple concept. Because you are muwahhid, those lines are fixed. No one can move them because God put them there. No one can touch them. Zina was haram at the time of Adam. It was haram at the time of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. It'll be haram till the day of judgment. Shirk was unacceptable at the time of Adam, time of Nuh, Muhammad, until the day of judgment. Honesty and trustworthiness and people's rights and oppression and justice and all of these concepts were drawn by the Almighty subhanahu. They're not, the winds of change will move everything around, but those lines stay exactly where they are, which is why you can take a Muslim, yeah, and remove him from his time and space and parachute him into any reality that you want, anywhere, anytime. And the Muslim will continue to observe Tawheed, to stay away from fahisha. He will not steal, he will not kill people, a true muwahhid. See, I'm not saying a generic Muslim, a true muwahhid, someone who's truly muwahhid. Why? Because their values are not subject to change. Their values don't come from a source that moves around. Their values come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is constant. He doesn't change. He gave these values, because they come from him, they're constant, which means I'm going to hold on to them regardless of where I am and what's happening to me, what's going on, which means my ethics are constant. This is what Tawheed is. Tawheed, it protects your ethics and your values and your behaviors. Without Tawheed, there's no way. I don't know how you're going to be. You're going to be the product of whatever environment you're in. You're going to be the product of whatever timeline that you're a part of, whatever society you're living in, whatever upbringing. But Tawheed will protect you because the lines are the same. Are the lines for a Muslim living in the West different than the lines for a Muslim living in the Middle East? Do I today believe that the value system, do I have a value system that's different to the one that Imam al-Tahawi had when he wrote this book 1,000 years ago? No, it's the same thing. If I ran into Idris alayhi salam in my life, it wouldn't make a difference. He and I both believe the same stuff. We both have the same ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق ولا تقربوا مال اليتيم إلا بالتي هي أحسن وأوفوا بالعهد إن العهد كان مسؤولا ولا تقربوا الزنا the same stuff, the exact same stuff. We agree. So we would actually be able to function almost with no problem because we have the same value system. Why? Because the source of these values is constant. But when you have a community where the source of values is not divine, it's human-based, meaning those lines are going to consistently be moved. So what was absolutely unacceptable 100 years ago will be fine today, and what's unacceptable today will be fine tomorrow, and vice versa. What is fine today may be unacceptable tomorrow. Things will move because the subject is not a constant source. It's a variable source. Now, some things can have that. The laws of the road and laws of building buildings and zoning areas and whatever. These are laws they were never designed to be constant. They're supposed to grow with the needs of the human experience. But there are other values that are not subject to that. And that's why Tawheed is so fundamental. Because that's what it does for you. It gives you constant values. I want you to think about that every time. But remember this caveat here, that rulings and laws and jurisprudent practices, they're not values or ethics or principles. They're not equal. They're not equal. You have to be able to differentiate them from one another. The majority of problems that I run into with, quote unquote, strict households is that parents, are trying to adhere to Islamic law or Islamic, they don't differentiate between what's an ethic, what's a value, and what's an issue of fiqh. Meaning scholars have differed upon historically. It's a ruling of jurisprudence. I'm not saying that these don't matter. No, they do. But they cannot be seen as equal. You cannot see the concept of birrul walidain to be equal to the haircuts that they have, or the color of clothing that they wear, right? They're not the same. You can say, I don't like this type of haircut. You don't like it. I understand that. I don't like this color of clothing. I understand that as well. That's no problem. But don't equate that to the values of La ilaha illallah, meaning the values that La ilaha illallah came to explain. Because if you do, then what you're actually performing, you're actually performing it's a disservice to the kid, because you're equating for him between these two things, and that becomes too much, so they drop them all. They can't carry them. We're not supposed to emphasize this piece here. You find a madhab, you follow it, you have an imam, you ask questions, you'll get different answers depending on where you're living, you'll get different answers depending on the situation that you're in. This is fine. This is the part of how Islam evolves. It's a part of how Islam has always been. But we need to make sure that we emphasize is that which Tawheed generates. which are the ethics and the values and the principles of our deen. These are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's al-Baqi, Jalla Jalaluhu, He's al-Samad, He never changes. The values that He taught are the same. They're always going to be the same. We have to hold on to the same ones. And that's actually what we're losing here. We're losing a lot of that. We've lost a lot of ground on this front, which is why I think Aqeeda is an important course everyone needs to take, because this is what you're going to end up with. You're going to understand that your source of values is not, it's not even Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. As highly ranked as he is, your source of values is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the divine, the almighty. Once you understand who he is, you'll take a step back and take a deep breath. Well, if the one that you've described to me with all of his might and all of his grace drew these lines, who am I? I need to observe these lines. This is not a joke, because it's not just a guy. If I draw the line, who cares? Do whatever you want. I'm just a person, and I'm not going to do it. What can I do? How far can I go? But when Allah draws the line, it's not the same thing. You can't see them to be equal. You can't. Fiqh, and most of fiqh are opinions of scholars, opinions based on interpretation. They're human beings. They can get things wrong. But when it comes to values, when it comes to these basics of Aqeeda, no, these are not. No one has the right to differ on this. When you differ on this, you leave Islam. They're not Muslim anymore. We call them, no, you're out. You can't differ on these things. You can't make these claims. You can't say that shurb al-khamr is halal. You can't make something up. You can't say that, you can't remove this value of disrespecting the intellect, of removing recreationally your intellect, you're intoxicating yourself for recreational purposes. That's a value. This is a value within our deen. You can't just decide that that's not a part of the deen anymore. You can't, certain things you can't decide. When it comes to dogs, there's different scholars have had different opinions. But you're more knowledgeable than Imam Malik. Imam Malik had an opinion on this. You may not like it, but you can't. No, I'm not belittling fiqh. That's all we do here. We have like 4 courses of fiqh running all the time. You have to learn fiqh, of course, but we have to emphasize that there's a difference in rulings of jurisprudence between laws and the values, because the values source is la ilaha illallah. So understanding that tawheed, or the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oneness of the source of values and ethics, means people have a set of values that do not change over time and cannot be corrupted, because they don't come through human beings and they're not subject to human interpretation. That's very beautiful. We need to have stuff that I can't interpret ala kayfi. I can't explain the way I want to explain. They're clear. Like, I can't take the concept of honesty and play around with it for a while and try to explain it in a way that suits. No, honesty is honesty. You know what it means. I know what it means. I cannot at any point decide that it's no longer important. Same thing goes for justice. I can't decide at some point, yes, justice, it's important, but you know, the people from that country over there, maybe, no, this is it, it's justice. That's why when you decide that justice is not, when you perform any form of racism or nepotism, you're known as to being corrupt, even by someone who's not muwahhid. It's interesting. Even those who don't have tawheed, but they know the values of tawheed, they know them. They may not stand by them, they may not support them, but they know what values come from tawheed. And they know that these are the superior values. And when they're in their favor, they will fight for them. It's just when they're not in their favor, they want people to break the rules for themselves. And the muwahhid will stand by this value, whether it's in their favor or not. When it's in your favor, it's not heroic, adi. It's when it's not. It's being honest when it's not in your favor. It's accepting justice when it's not in your favor. It's being trustworthy when it's not in your favor. It's eating only halal when it's not in your favor. Because these are values. You don't dare cross this, because this is not a law made by man. This is a law made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawheed gives people, in my opinion, the only chance they have as societies to uphold values. The only chance a society has to uphold high values is Tawheed. Or else over time, they will lose all of their values. It's just a matter of time, right? Compare, the Western society today to 100 years ago or 200 years ago, right? I'm not saying that all the good value, every value changed to the worse. No, some values got better, but a lot of good values got worse. And the reason that there's this fluctuation of values is because there's no constant source for them. There's nothing to tie them all together. There's no standard. What's the standard? There's no standard. It's whatever people decide. We're variable. Our mindsets, our perspectives, our experiences, what we like, what we dislike, what we collectively agree upon. This changes throughout time. It fluctuates all the time. If we're going to depend on, if values are going to depend on the collective experience of the intellectuals of the human race, then those values have no chance. They have no chance of having any degree of stability for more than a century. At best, they don't have a century. But think about your deen. Despite the fact that many of us don't follow these things, the values have not changed, right? Despite that many Muslims don't follow, but there's no disagreement on what the values are. He'll sit there drinking, but he knows it's how. He knows it's wrong. He won't pray, but he knows he should. He'll take a rashwa, he'll take a bribe. He knows he shouldn't. They know what's right and what's wrong. People just have ways of rationalizing their behaviors and stuff. And it comes from a weak tawheed. It comes from the weakness of tawheed. It's weak. Strong tawheed does not allow you to do it. You're too scared. You have too much reverence of the Almighty to do something like that. You have too much reverence to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, I bent your rule, or I ignored your rule, or you decided that rule is not going to apply to me today because I'm having a hard time. You don't dare do it. You don't do it because you know who put the rule there. And he explained to you, you cross this line, and you're going to be in trouble. So you take that seriously. If I tell you you're going to be in trouble, think of it. It's not the same. It's not the same if a father tells you you're going to be in trouble, if a police officer, if the judge, if the president of the United States, they can tell you're in trouble, but Allah is telling you you're in trouble. So think of the most powerful person that you can imagine. If they tell you making this mistake puts you in trouble, what would you do? Then now think of Allah. And if you don't really have a good differentiation between the strongest person or thing you can imagine and Allah, that's what Tawheed is for. This is what this course is for. You need to completely different. There's no comparison at all, like at all. It's not apples and oranges. You can't even use that because apple and orange are two things. It doesn't apply to that. It's way beyond that. It's way beyond that. And that's the point of what we're going to be covering, inshallah. Tawheed. This is what Tawheed means. And we don't lie. We don't steal. We don't inflict harm. We don't oppress. We don't spread oppression. We don't fornicate. We don't intoxicate ourselves recreationally. We don't cheat. We don't betray. So this is what Tawheed turns into. You said, La ilaha illallah. You've accepted that your source of values, it comes from Allah. And then he explained the values. Khalas, this is it. These are it. Never will I cross these lines. That's a person you can live with. Now, someone who believes that, that's a good neighbor. You can have that as a neighbor. You can have that as a friend. You'll marry into someone like that. No problem. Why? Because you can trust people like that. You're safe around them because you know what you're going to get. You know the values, they're constant. They're not going to change in the middle of it. And if they do, well, then they left their tawheed, which means they left everything that defines them, which means you should step away, which means I have to walk away because you've broken the sacred rule, you've crossed the line that you said you would never cross to begin with. So when you say La ilaha illallah, when you say it, what you're saying is, Ya Rab, I will never cross your lines. Your values are constant. They're sacred to me. I would never, ever go against them. And when I do, I repent immediately. And I feel the remorse and I feel the regret. And I turn to you asking for forgiveness because I should have never, ever dared cross your line. That's what Tawheed is. And that's why it's the most important part of our deen, right? So if you walk away from this course with nothing else but that, I'll be happy. Walk away with understanding why Tawheed is so valuable to you. But then the problem becomes this. If Tawheed is not serving this purpose for you, then you have to revise your understanding of it. Like if Tawheed is not doing that for you, if this is not when Tawheed kicks in your life, which is to straighten out your values, make sure your ethics are constant, then you have to revise yourself and revise your understanding of it and how you're practicing and following the concept of Tawheed altogether. Because the source of all of our ethics and all of our principles come from La ilaha illallah. We base it on this pure declaration of the oneness of our Creator. ضرب الله مثلا. I'll end with that. We'll start next week. I'll start with the recitation of this. This text, by the way, won the challenge of time. Beat the test of time. This text is still taught 1,150 years going strong. Wallahi, I'll get those who recite it appropriately, I can give them an ijazah. and give you a chain of narration back to the Imam al-Tahawi, rahmatullah alayhi. This is how Islamic texts are actually taught there through chains of narration. Yeah, you read this text, and actually, I would advise the first maybe 25 verses, memorize them. Try to memorize if you can, because they're Inna Allah wahidun la sharika lah wa la shay'a mithluhu wa la shay'a yu'jizuh. It's very simple. And then if at any moment you're in doubt or you're struggling, you just recite them to yourself. Here is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and you have access to all these slides and all there's in the classroom. There's the translation that is more in the Ash'ari direction. There's translation more in the Athari direction. I want you to read as much as you can. I won't test you on any of the extra reading. What I'll only test you on is what I'm talking to you about in the course, nothing else. But I encourage you to, read as much as possible so that you're comfortable, with what it is that you're reading. And you have to watch the Facing Disbelief series. So make sure that you do that. There'll be a question at the end of the course if you watched it or not. And I'll explain. I do this every time. So if you heard this from me, it's okay. Just ignore me. So this is where I learned from. So I attended a hadith. This is the hadith course in my third year of Sharia. And Sheikh al-Sha'al, Hafidhahullah, Sheikh Muhammad Tabib, he's a dentist, Muhammad Khair al-Sha'al, one of our teachers in Damascus. He told us you have to read something called Kitab ibn Athir al-Jazari, Jami' al-Usul. It's a large 14, 15 volume book of hadith. So he said you have to read it. He told us a couple of times that you have to read it. Yeah, sure, we have to read it. He didn't seem to, he really follow up, but he kept on saying you have to read it. Come the day before the exam, he brought a mushaf, the biggest mushaf I've seen in my life. I think he imported it from Turkey. It was like a mushaf as big. He brought it and he put it in the middle. And he said, all right, one by one, you have to come up, put your hand on the mushaf and swear that you read the book. 4 of us did. There was like 30 students. 4 of us did. The rest of us, I didn't. And then we had to go and spend the weekend. And we read the whole book. We had to come back and me that read the book, and then we wrote the exam. So I learned, I'm not going to do that. I don't have a mushaf that big anyways. Your job is just to read, listen to the series and just click that you did. Because a lot of the concepts that I'll explain here, I will maybe explain them. I'll summarize them, but I talk about them in a little bit more depth. Also, I want you to hear kind of the whole argument, just so that you have a proper... that you're comfortable, inshallah, with the with what we're teaching. I was going to tell you a story. I forgot. What was I going to say? Subhanallah, I had a story I was going to share with you before he left. Khalas, it's gone. طيب خير inshallah. We'll end inshallah with that. The next week inshallah we'll start with reciting the text. You're welcome to read a little bit of the text and kind of read the translation. I do have slides that have the text translated, so you don't have to do much work yourself. Just kind of read and think about what it is that we're talking about. Subhanallah bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka wa 'azzama ala nabiyyina wa habibina wa qurrati a'yunina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khair, barakallahu fikum. If there are any questions, I'm here for the next 5-10 minutes to answer questions. Otherwise, you're welcome to go, inshallah ta'ala.
To get the slides, they'll need to register.
Yeah. So in order for you to have access to the slides, you have to register to the website, and then Sister Neda is here to talk to you if you're not in the classroom or you want to be in the classroom. You can speak to Sister Neda and she can help you, inshallah, get access to that, inshallah ta'ala.
في أسئلة ولا ما في أسئلة؟
بس للشباب الصغار. كيف حالك؟ الله يبارك فيك. حياكم الله يبارك فيك.
بس
كيف حالك؟
يعني أنا بسمع كثير على الأشياء هاي تاع التوحيد، التقسيم التوحيد الربوبية
نعم.
أنا بسمع مرات كثير وهذا التقسيم خاص بمحمد بن عبد الوهاب.
لا.
بس خليني أقول لك شغلة.
لا هو مش خاص فيه، لا مش خاص.
ماشي.
إيه؟
أنا ما بقول لك إنه هو من ظهر وبينه واشتغل أكثر شيء عليه. أنا على كل مش هو
لا هو
جزء من نعم. سؤالي عندنا توحيد الربوبية والألوهية وأسماء وصفات.
نعم.
لو إحنا هذول الثلاث المكونات، هل لكل واحد لحاله له قيمة؟
كيف يعني؟ ما فهمت عليك.
يعني لو أنت اعتقدت توحيد الربوبية لواحد له قيمة؟
لا تحتاج الكل، مثل ما تحتاج كل صفات الله سبحانه وتعالى.
لا أنا ما بحتاج كل صفات الله، أنا بحتاج كمسلم بسيط مش عالم، بحتاج لتوحيد الربوبية والألوهية يكونوا مع بعض. أنا ما بحتاج أؤمن بالربوبية لحاله والألوهية لحاله، الاثنين لازم يكونوا مع بعض. إذا عملت إنه ربي الله هو رب ما عبدته، هذا توحيد الربوبية لحاله ما بينفع.